Hi, and welcome to the video version of the Atlanta Voiceover Studio and ProVoiceOverTraining.com podcast. This is part 2 about podcasts. Heidi speaks with DonTae Hodge, and she'll share his tremendous resume with you, but they talk through the tech side. What's the most efficient podcast setup for voice actors? Podcast recording studios. Best audio levels for podcasts. What are the biggest audio mistakes in podcasting? How do you prep the guests audio-wise? Where to find sound effects and music for podcasts, and a whole lot more. So let's get to it. Here's Heidi and DonTae.
Okay, we are going to talk audio for
Yes.
podcasting today. For voice actors, what's the most efficient setup if they want to do a podcast? Is it just using their own booth and interviewing people virtually, or could they set up something outside of their booth, or what would you suggest?
So I would say it depends, right? It's kind of a loaded question because it depends on what you're going for, right? Of course, it depends on the aesthetic you want. Do you want it to kind of have a cool background, right? In that case, you might want to rent a studio, which I know we'll talk about at some point. But I would say the good thing about being a voiceover artist is you already have a lot of the tools, right? So that's the great part. You already have a lot of the tools that you need, which is awesome. That's a great starting place. You probably already have a great mic that you use, a great audio interface, a great space to record in. So definitely take advantage of those tools and then figure out, because what I've learned is people typically get stuck at like the recording or the editing of a podcast specifically. So I would say figure out how you can easily record and easily edit that podcast. And there are some tools. So I actually have a few props with me. I have,
Okay.
this is a
We
Rodecaster
love
Pro.
props. Yes.
So this makes it really easy to record a podcast. You just plug your mics in, you could cue sound effects or intro, outro music, and it kind of records it all to a 2-track. So this could get you set up to where you don't even have to edit the podcast. There are settings on here for different microphones. So this kind of gives you a head start. And then if you don't have a budget for that, there is this one, right? So this is a Zoom pod track. This one is 4 mics in. There are sound pads and you can do kind of the same thing. So again, this will get you like 90% there without having to do a whole bunch of editing. And the recording aspect is really simple because if we're talking about a DAW, I mean, some voiceover artists might be familiar, but depending on the voiceover artist, you might not be, right? So this really simplifies the process. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, that really does simplify the process.
Yeah.
Sounds great. And what is the main, so you and I are on Riverside. That's what we use, Riverside.fm, to record. Is that the main one that you have heard most people use, or is there other platforms? And I'm sorry, let me tell you what Riverside is. So it's a way that it's almost like a Zoom, but it's better. That you can connect with somebody that you're interviewing. So even if they're not a professional voice actor, you can connect with them like you would send a Zoom link.
Yeah.
So is this kind of the standard, or are there other platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I love Riverside personally. It's what I've used the most as it relates to remote recording. So to kind of go back to your question, this is a great way to do it too. Because if you want to do a video podcast, this is an easy way where you have audio and video kind of already synced. So that part of the work is kind of already being done for you. And there's a lot of background stuff that Riverside does too. So I would say Riverside is a good place to start, especially if you are, I would say Zoom and other things, it's possible, but Riverside is kind of that part of the market where they are specific for people who are trying to actually do audio, right? Whereas Zoom, that's not necessarily their focus.
Yeah. For Zoom, are there specific settings that we should be paying attention to for audio? Like, say a voice actor's like, look, I spend a lot of money. I can't spend more money on another platform, but I could do Zoom. And so what are some ways that we can optimize the audio in Zoom?
Yeah, so I would just go into the settings and make sure that no other compression is happening, right? Because again, Zoom, their focus is how to get you a meeting and how to make it as smooth as possible. So they'll do stuff like compressing of audio and or video to just kind of keep the bandwidth low on your internet so that you have a smooth meeting, right? But for audio professionals or people trying to do a podcast, that might not be ideal because you want the highest quality audio, or in the case of us, we want the highest quality video also.
Right.
So that's what I would say. Go into those settings and just kind of say, hey, Zoom, I actually want the best audio quality and I'll sacrifice, but I'll say this. And we always do this with Riverside too.
Yeah.
So always do what's called a tape sync or a backup record, right? So let's say we were doing well, we obviously are doing a podcast, but if this was a podcast I was working on or producing, I would have had a pre-production meeting with you, and I would set up some kind of way for you to record a backup on your end, whatever that is. You know, if I have to send you some equipment, that's fine. Or even if we're using the voice memos app on your phone. Obviously, that's not most ideal, but if something goes wrong with Riverside or Zoom, we at least have some backup audio, you know, so yeah.
And that is why you are the professional. I love it. I love
It's
it.
important.
Oh my gosh, that's great. So we just mentioned before about like renting a space. Sometimes as a voice actor, you're like, great, I can do most of the interviews from my booth. But what if they want to do it in person and they're not like, I don't necessarily want to have people coming over to my house?
Yeah.
Are there options or places that people could go to rent a space to record?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll speak for Atlanta because obviously that's where we are. There are some great spaces, you know. I can think of maybe 5 off the top of my head. Like there's a spot called 3 Millie Productions. They're kind of close to the downtown area. Really cool space. Like it's in a very historic building, so a lot of like exposed brick, and they have it set up really cool in there. And then there's a spot called, I'm going to butcher the name, I think it's DonTae Studios or DonTae Studios.
Okay.
A lot more of the polished looking type of podcast look. And then, you know, studio that I have a great relationship with because I used to work there and manage there is Lantern, right? Now, what I'll say about Lantern is they are more in the audiobook space, but because of how their studios are set up, it's very multi-use, right? So they do podcast recordings there. And then a cool one is Bravo Ocean. You know, they are also pretty close to the city, more so music, but they do have a podcast space, and they are always renovating their studio, and they use like a lot of greenery and just cool stuff where if you're like looking for like a cool vibe as like the background of your podcast, that'll be a great option. And then I'll also throw in using like Pearspace, because Pearspace, what's cool about Pearspace, you could get stuff relatively cheap. And it could be like very niche stuff, right? So if you want something that's kind of like very different as like the setting of an episode for a podcast, Pearspace is a really creative way where you could kind of like mix it up a little bit. So those would be my suggestions.
Yeah. Have you worked with 221 at all? Jeff Dollar and Callie?
I haven't,
any
no.
chance? Okay,
where are they at?
Because I know that they're over like, I think near Ponce City Market.
Okay.
But sometimes they'll open their space up to record podcasts
I'm gonna have to check
as well.
them out.
They're awesome. Okay, those are some really great tips. The other thing that I thought of that I was like, gosh, this seems like, you know, some people may have it. I guess you just have to call your local library, but do local libraries have like spaces to come to record a podcast?
You know, I've heard about some libraries actually introducing that. You know, so that's a good point. Like, because obviously, you know, that would be very affordable.
Right.
You know,
it may not be the best quality, probably.
Yeah, you know,
but,
quality
you know.
could be questionable depending. You know, it depends, right? Because I know some places have like an AV guy, so some libraries might have an AV person working there, so that could be cool. But another thing that I thought about is a lot of apartment buildings actually are starting to put like podcast studios as an amenity. And actually, the last company that I worked for full time, that was one of the things that I was working on. Working with developers to put that space and make it a high quality space where people can actually use, like it's an amenity that people can actually take advantage of. So that is a thing. Actually, my friends, I helped them move this past weekend, and that was one of the amenities that they have at their new property. So that is a cool thing because you're already paying rent there. So, you know, why not? You know, why not?
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to be vulnerable and tell you one of the biggest mistakes I made at the beginning when I was podcasting years ago is I got a call from a friend and she said, hey, I'm in my Jeep and I know that I'm in a Jeep, but like I'm cranking your podcast all the way up and I cannot hear it. Like I cannot understand what you're saying. And I made the mistake of treating it more like a booked VO job that I'm sending. So I'm not going to crank those levels up.
Right.
What levels do we need to have our audio at for podcasting?
Yeah, that is a great question, right? Because especially if you work on like multiple types of media, right? So if you do audiobooks, if you do voiceovers, like they are also different. If you do music, that is also very different. Typically, what we're aiming for when we're editing and mastering a podcast is negative 16 LUFS, right? And to
Okay.
explain what a LUF is really quickly, it's basically just think of it as how humans perceive sound, and that is like a loudness scale,
Mm-hmm.
right? So just think of it like that. It is the standard that Spotify is using, Apple Music is using. It is like the new standard because it takes into account how humans perceive sound, and then
Mm-hmm.
that is the loudness scale, essentially.
Okay.
So negative
Gotcha.
16 LUFS. And to figure out what that is, because people are probably like, well, how do I know if I'm hitting
Yeah.
negative 16 LUFS? You can buy meters for relatively cheap.
Okay.
It's just plugins that you put on your master
Oh,
fader in your DAW, and then you can kind of just see if you're hitting that level.
that's
So
really
yeah,
cool.
and that
Okay,
is a
cool.
very common mistake where,
Yeah.
your podcast is way too low.
Yeah.
It's not like music, because I know some platforms as it relates to music will like normalize your sound to bring
Mm-hmm.
it up. I don't know that podcast has gotten to that point yet where they like will bring your stuff up to match other stuff. So,
Yeah.
and you never want to be that podcast where it's like a
Right.
podcast is like blaring and then yours is like you got to turn it up to 50,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes, totally. And I've
Yeah.
listened to other podcasts too that are like way too low, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
try so hard, but I'm like, I can't hear them. I can't. Which brings me to, audio. If you've listened to any podcast for a long time, you'll notice like there are some podcasters that you're like, I can't, I love the content, but I
Mhm.
cannot keep listening because of the audio quality.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that people make with audio in podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, the first one would be not caring about the audio, right?
Yeah.
We live in interesting times where it's all about like quickly putting something out, right? So I think a lot of times people are like, hey, it doesn't matter. I could just record this on my iPhone, not edit it, not do anything, and just kind of put it out. And unfortunately, maybe they're not entirely wrong because the consumer has changed a little bit too, where I feel like how much the consumer cares about that audio quality has decreased a little bit.
Right.
But I would say just care about the audio, right? That's like the
Mm,
first thing. Like actually care about the audio and try to figure out like how can I get this the best with what I have? I'm not saying that you have to buy $1,000 microphone, right? Because
yeah.
that might not make sense for everybody. But making sure your recording levels are at an because one thing that I run into with like especially newer podcasters is the recording level is way too low, and
Mhm.
what happens is I have to bring it up, but because it's too low, not to
Oh.
get too nerdy here, the lower your recording level is, the closer it is to the noise floor, right? So
Mhm.
when I bring it up, I'm bringing up the level and the noise floor, and it becomes
Right.
harder to separate them in an edit. So
Yeah.
you just want to make sure you're recording at a healthy level. Make sure that you are using a microphone that, I don't want to say that makes sense, but like that's going to get you some of the way there. And if you're
Mhm.
using a popular microphone like the SM7B, which is
Mhm.
probably the most popular podcast microphone, the
Yeah.
thing that a lot of people miss about that microphone is it has a very low audio level. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to use what's called an inline preamp, like a cloud
Yeah.
lifter or what's called a dynamite. It just adds gain before it gets to the preamp.
Yeah.
And if you record with that mic, you can end up with recording levels that are way too low.
Yeah.
But what's funny is they actually just brought out a new version of that mic called the SM7BB, which fixes the problem. So
Nice.
yeah, so if you have
That's
the old
great.
version, get the inline preamp. If you're
Yeah.
in the market for that mic, get the new one,
Okay.
essentially.
That is so good to know because
Hmm.
the problem is when you're interviewing other people that are not voice actors or,
Yeah,
not used to being interviewed, and they're on that microphone and they just start going like
yeah,
crazy,
yeah,
and it's like, gosh, you can't,
yeah.
there's nothing you can do at that
Yeah,
point.
and I always
So,
try to put that
yeah.
microphone on a boom arm too, and just tell people take it with you. It
Yeah.
responds well to like movement, just because of how it's built. So if you want to move, take the mic with you. If it's on an arm, it's kind of easy to like drag around. That's
Yeah.
fine. So I always try to always put that on a boom arm so that people know, hey, like just move it when you move.
Oh, that's such a great tip. In
Yeah,
fact, that actually leads to one of the things I wanted to ask you is what are best ways to prep a guest
yeah,
to make sure that their audio is the best? Because you can control more of your audio, but it's harder
hmm,
to think through all those things even for a guest.
yeah. So I would say it's all in like the pre-production, right? So
Mm,
I would say, and this is something that I used to do a lot because we would work with a lot of guests, right? Schedule a pre-production call,
mm,
and usually you want to do it some days before the recording, just in case you need to mail them something, right? You need to order something from Amazon for it to get to them really quickly. Schedule it as many days as humanly possible before the actual recording, and just kind of go through it with them. See what they have, see how to optimize what they have. If you've sent them like equipment, help them get set up with that. Do test records, figure out a backup record system. Yeah, that's the biggest thing. Pre-production. And also important with the pre-production is what I'm looking for is the space that they're recording in. So I'm also listening for that, right? So if they're recording in their living room and I can hear a lot of stuff going on, I might ask them, hey, is there another space in your house, apartment, wherever that we can test out? So that is how I kind of work with guests to prep them, figure out what they have, what do I need to send them, if anything, and can I get on a call with them to test record, set up a backup record, listen to their space. And that usually fixes 99% of problems.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on making sure that they have like earbuds in when they're on, or what are your thoughts on the headset?
I would say it is very important. So like right now I have in-ears in, so they're super low key, but some kind of headphone, just because, especially if you're using something like Riverside, weird stuff can happen, like just echoing and things of that nature. So whatever we could do to like just cancel that out and avoid it, headphones is usually the biggest thing. Like some kind of headphones, some kind of in-ear, some kind of, even if it's just AirPods and you're just using the hearing function on it and not necessarily the microphone, that's fine too. But usually something that you could connect to your computer interface will be better, because you don't have to worry about Bluetooth and all these other variables, right?
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, music and sound effects. You talked earlier about the Podcaster Pro, or just the Podcaster. Did you have the Podcaster Pro? Or
Rodecaster Pro.
Rodecaster. I'm sorry. The Rodecaster. I always say that wrong. The Rodecaster. But that, you could press the buttons for sound effects or intro music or whatever. Where are the best places to find sound effects or music for podcasting?
Yeah, great question. So, of course, the first thing I'm going to say is, if you have the budget and the bandwidth, sound designer, composer, right? That'll always be like the most custom tailored. You could kind of work with them to kind of craft a sound just for your thing, but I know that's not realistic for everybody. So, I mean, there's so many options online, First of all, I'll say that there's a spot called freesound.org, right? So if you don't have like the budget to even like license stuff, freesound.org is royalty free. They have sound effects, they have different things. So I would start there if like you don't have the budget at all. Maybe you're just starting, you're like, I can't invest in a library of whatever. Start there. Then I would use something like artlist.io, Epidemic Sound, Soundstripe, and on all of those things you could find royalty-free music that you can license, sound effects, atmospheric stuff, So if you're doing more of a narrative and you want to like add sound effects and atmospheres and stuff like that, those things could be cool, like Epidemic Sound and stuff like that.
Oh, that's so helpful. Okay, so that leads me to the next thing, talking about AI. And let me preface this by saying that one of the things that I hear all the time from anyone and everyone that has ever done a podcast, they'll do it for even a month or 2 months or whatever, and they'll be like, oh, that was so much work. And I'm like, tell me about it. I've had like multiple podcasts tell me about it. But the more you do it, the more you kind of find systems and find ways to make it a little bit easier.
Right.
So one of those tools, and listen, again, like DonTae said, if you have the budget, pay a sound design engineer. If you have a budget, you could pay a producer to help you out with a lot of these tasks. But also there's a lot of great AI tools out there that can help streamline things for you, so it's not as much work.
Yeah.
What are some of those tools that you found? Or what's your perspective on it? I mean, you may be like, no, don't touch it.
I think everything in moderation, right? So, I'm a fan of using AI to help like scripting, ideation, how to structure a show, name storming,
right?
How to approach a potential guest, pitching to a potential guest, I think that's beautiful. As it relates to on the more audio side of things, I think it's cool for like plugins and stuff like that. There are a lot of like audio plugins that are using AI where it's like one knob and it like just makes your audio sound better. Like,
Yeah.
if that's where you are with your skill set, I say go for it, right? Like, if
Mm.
you're like, hey, I can't pay an editor or a mastering engineer to get this where I would love it to be right now, why not use that tool? And then as it relates to like actual voices, this is where it gets a bit more touchy for
Yeah.
me, right? And I just say it depends. Let's say again, let's use the example of a narrative podcast, right? Let's say you wanted to do a part of that episode and it's a news reporter for like 15 seconds and you're like, I'm on a time crunch, I can't really find a voiceover artist to like do this news reporter thing. I can't be mad at you for saying, based on time and based on budget, you're going to use one of these AI voice tools to kind of, replicate this news reporter for 15 seconds, right?
Yeah.
But again, it is touchy, right? It is touchy, but I say use it where it makes. And there are some places it makes sense. I think like scripting and ideation is like the strongest place, in my opinion. So that's more so pre-production.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little bit of post-production where it's like you're editing and mastering and you're doing it on your own and you don't have the skill set. I say go for the plugins that are like smart and like looking at your audio and figuring out how to make it sound polished. So those are my thoughts.
I think too, another great idea is because we're all voice actors and we know, most of our friends are voice actors. We're involved in that industry. Podcasting could be something where you get together with, people you've met in a class
Mm-hmm.
and you divide up the responsibilities. So one
Yeah.
person that loves to do editing could do the editing, and somebody else that really enjoys coming up with the ideas
Yeah.
can do that. And it's a way that you guys can all learn a lot
Yeah.
and contribute in a way, I don't know. Just it could help how much work goes into it and kind of divide it up, and
Yeah.
everyone's benefiting in a way. So
Yeah, I think that's a
yeah.
great idea because I think, what people don't realize is how much goes into podcast production, right?
Mhm.
Like, I've been a part of like entire machines where it's like it's a whole team, it's a strategy
Yeah.
team. So I think people underestimate what it takes to make a good podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it always has to be like super high level, super high production like that, but like it takes a lot. So the more you can lean on your community and, like for example, I have a friend who loves editing videos and he's always like, if you need something edited, send it my way. Like lean on those people, see how you can exchange and swap, and kind of
Yeah.
build your thing slowly from the ground up, especially if you want to stay away from like, you want to keep human interaction high, right? So it's
Mhm.
like maybe you don't want to touch AI as much and you're like, how do I get a human to do this thing?
Yeah.
Obviously take advantage of tools like your community and then stuff like Fiverr, right? Which is
Mhm.
like relatively cheap, but you're still working with a human and supporting a human,
Right,
so
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you offer like editing services, or what type of things do you help other people that are, launching a podcast or already have a podcast and they need some help with?
Yeah, so I do kind of a little bit of everything from like consulting, as far as like kind of what we're talking about, like what do I
Mhm.
need to get set up? What do I need to be looking for? What tools do I need to have? Where do I need to go to find sound effects? So I do quite a bit of like consulting as it relates
Mhm.
to just kind of telling people, hey, this is where you start, this is what you do. I also do editing also. I'm not editing as much these days just because I'm busy with different things, but I still
Sure.
will and
Okay.
would. Mixing, I
Mhm.
do some mixing. So that is you basically handing me your podcast, handing me the elements and saying, hey, make it sound like a finished and polished show,
Yeah,
which is important. So
totally.
yeah, so that's kind of what I do in the podcast realm. I want to get back into, because for a while I was doing more production as it
Yeah.
relates to podcasts, so helping people produce podcasts. I would like to get back there,
Mhm.
but right now these days it's been more so on the post production and then kind of consulting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that, just a suggestion for those that are listening, that I've done in the past for my podcast is I paid somebody to help me do like a really good intro and outro. So
Mm-hmm.
they mixed it and made sure it sounded really good. And that's
Yeah,
something you can plug and play to each one.
exactly.
And that's something that's like you can contribute and pay to somebody else that does stuff like this, like
Mm-hmm.
DonTae or somebody else, but it's not going to break the bank for every,
Right.
every episode. And it's a
Yeah.
way that it can sound, your podcast can sound really good, really polished, really
Mm-hmm.
professional,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and I
So,
think that's a worthy investment because you think
hmm
about it like this. Like think of like when we already
right.
know what that's associated with, right?
Yes.
So the idea is to have something like that associated to your podcast, right? A
hmm
sound that when people hear it, they know that that's your podcast. And I
Right.
think that that's a worthy investment. And like you said, you typically pay for that one time,
hmm
and then you just use it, and just make sure you get intro, you get outro, get as many different variations as you can,
hmm
ones that you could use for content for socials versus, so,
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
say that that's a worthy investment for
hmm
sure.
Yep. Totally. I love it. Well,
Yeah,
DonTae, thank you so much for
of
joining us on the
course.
podcast today. And I will make sure that I link everything that we talked about and
Perfect.
some of the recommendations that DonTae had and his email address if you want to reach out, and his social media handles. So thank you again, DonTae. We
No,
really
it was a
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
This was fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching the video version of our Atlanta Voiceover Studio podcast. We've got a new one that comes out wherever you like to listen to podcasts on the first of each month. So check that out. And of course, I'll put the video version of them here each month as well. Thanks for watching. And stick around if you want to find out how to level up your voiceover game. We've got something called the Voiceover Mentorship Membership. And, well, here's me and Heidi to tell you all about it.
Have you spent a bunch of time going through voiceover training only to now feel lost and not sure what your next steps are?
Or maybe you had a little success and started booking some voiceover jobs feeling good, but then it died down a little, and now you're unsure about how to create that long and sustainable career.
Or wish you had a support group to inspire you, hold you accountable, and answer those ever-elusive industry questions that come up all the time?
Well, we've been in your shoes, having to try to figure it all out in pieces here and there. So that's why we want to introduce you to the Atlanta Voiceover Studio and ProVoiceOverTraining.com VO Mentorship Membership.
I know, like you need another membership, right? Yeah, we totally get it. But listen, the right one can make all the difference in a business.
Yeah, the reason we wanted to do this was because so many people go through training, get demos, maybe learn about voiceover from video courses like our own, ProVoiceOverTraining.com, or other places to train.
But when it came to actually putting it into practice and building a business, it felt overwhelming, confusing, and for some, maybe you, paralyzing.
Yeah, we could have created a workshop or class for this and it would have been worth it, but we wanted a solution that was for talent, that was just more affordable, convenient, and valuable.
We also wanted to be right there with you, helping you along the way as much as we could.
So before we jump into what the monthly mentorship membership covers, let's talk about the extras first.
Members will get first access to sign up for Industry Pro workouts. These are virtual small group opportunities to read for agents, casting directors, or creative directors, receive their feedback, and get to know them better. And we only have 15 spots for each, so they fill up quickly.
And you get $20 off Industry Pro workouts as members. The mentorship membership is only $25 a month, so if you love doing the Industry Pro workouts anyway, the membership basically pays for itself.
And on top of the Industry Pro workouts, we'll also occasionally give members discounts to training and other offerings.
And those are just the bonuses. Each month you'll get
professional training modules. These are live Zooms we'll host monthly along with industry expert guests, and topics range from industry insights, business strategies, performance, and more.
a resource library, a collection of past Zoom sessions, scripts, audition prep guides, tech setup guides, and reference materials for different genres.
Toolkits. These are downloadable resources like vocal warm-ups, exercises, and script breakdowns to build a solid foundation in voiceover.
Plus, and this is a biggie, you'll have access to our private community message board where you can ask questions and get support. Now, we built out this membership to grow with you no matter where you are in your voiceover journey.
So we hope you'll join us. Take the next step toward a rewarding voiceover career with mentorship that grows with you. Join today for only $25 a month.